Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Josh. I'm going to be your presenter today. We're here to talk about the chart of accounts wizard in Church Windows accounting. Probably going to be discussing a little more than that, but that is essentially what we're here to really talk about, in the long run. Uh, your chart of accounts, how that gets entered into Church Windows initially. But we're going to talk a little bit about fund accounting and how you set up your accounts in Church Windows. Basically, what we're talking about is when you install Church Windows and open accounting for the very first time, like we are today, we're basically assuming we're starting from scratch. It opens up to our setup chart of accounts window. This is our setup chart of accounts screen. We call it the chart of accounts wizard. But basically, it is the window that allows you to set up and construct your chart of accounts. If you're not installing Church Windows for the very first time, but maybe you have had a chart of accounts historically in the past, and things are kind of just not very good, or the books are not in good shape, and the church wants to start over and enter a brand new chart of accounts, when you choose that option to set up a new or enter a new chart of accounts to start a new accounting year, you again will get this same exact window that starts our chart of accounts wizard. Okay? Now, I'm not getting into this yet. We're going to come back to that, but we are going to come back to the chart of accounts wizard in detail, but there are some other things I want to discuss first. Okay? The first thing that we've got to make sure that we're clear about is that Church Windows accounting is a fund accounting system. All right, Church Windows, churches base their managing of their money based on what members and visitors have designated or given money to the church to specify what those gifts are designated to be applied to. Okay, so when a member gives a amount of money and they say, okay, I want that to be used for X, Y, and Z, then if the church wants to accept that, then they have to use that, honor that request, and use it for what it's been designated for. Hence why it's called fund accounting, okay? But before we get into that, I want to bring up here, I'm going to go back to our website. We're going to go up to support, customer support. We're going to go to the resource center, okay? And I'm going to bring up some useful information here that's already existing on the Church Windows website under the resource center that will help you if you're unfamiliar with funds and fund accounting, all right? So under our resource center, down the right-hand side here, we see the search box, and I'm going to click in there, and I'm going to simply type in the word theory, okay? And down here to the left now, we see accounting fund theory, okay? This is a document that we've had out here for many, many years, that talks about or covers and explains what fund accounting is and what it does. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on this, maybe 15, depending on how quickly I can get through the material, okay? But if you are struggling or unfamiliar with fund accounting, we strongly recommend that you look at this document, okay? Basically, it describes in detail, and then I'm going to click on the fund theory view, click or view or print ePDF, and it opens the document on, understanding fund accounting software. What do you mean, fund accounting? And so this document, in the course of 6 pages, it's a 6-page document, really goes through and explains very nicely what funds do or fund accounting is, okay? A fund, essentially, it's not an asset. An asset account is an account the church owns, checking, savings accounts, investments, CDs, money markets, fixed assets, accounts the church owns. Those are not funds. They can equally represent funds, but they are not funds in terms of Church Windows, okay? The word fund here in this document, I think, is really the most important part of this to help you understand what a fund does, okay? A fund, in essence, is a designation of money. It is money that we are choosing to set aside and report and track separately from other fund monies. It has its own income accounts and its own expenses, and it may have a balance that carries over from one year to the next. Okay? Basically, there are two things that you need to ask yourself when determining whether you need to set up a fund in church windows accounting. One, will there be an unspent balance of money, income, offset by expenses at the end of the year that you need to track into the next accounting year? Okay, question number one. Number two is, do we need or want to track that money separately from other fund monies, whether there's a balance at the end of the year or not? Okay, so if the answer to either one or both of those questions is yes, then you need to set up a fund. Okay, and that appears on the bottom side of our balance sheet. Okay, you can set up and have as absolutely many funds in church windows accounting as you wish. Okay, funds are essentially equity accounts. They're accounts that store a balance, that track a balance. Not an asset. You can have assets for those, but funds are essentially equity accounts with their own income accounts and their own expenses, and they may have a balance that carries over from one year to the next. Okay? Fund balance accounts carry balances forward into the new accounting year that income and expense accounts do not. Okay? I cannot stress that enough. Okay? Income and expense accounts start every accounting year with a zero balance. There is no way to enter a beginning balance in an income or an expense. That is not their job. The job of an income or an expense account is to track that accounting year's income and expenses only. The fund's job is to carry forward a balance. Okay? Again, you're not limited in the number of funds you can have. Folks, I've seen charts of accounts where the church has one fund and only one fund. Okay, and all of their income and expenses are linked to that fund. Other charts of accounts I've seen where churches have lots of funds, dozens of funds. Okay, but it all depends on how the church wants to set up and construct their chart of accounts. We would recommend starting simply, folks. Okay, set up, a handful of funds that you think you need, knowing that you can always add more funds later on. Okay, and that's what I talk about is when we're finished with the chart of accounts wizard today, I'm not limited to how many accounts I'm adding on that. I can always go in and add more accounts of any kind later on after the chart of accounts wizard is done. Okay. Maybe if if you're not wanting to use funds, then perhaps Church Windows Accounting isn't the program for you because it is a fund accounting system. You cannot set up a chart of accounts in Church Windows Accounting without having at least one fund. Okay, if that were the case and that's what we were wanting to set up, then every income and every expense account in our chart of accounts would be linked to that fund. So this further down the document here on page 3, it shows the linking. Here's our general fund. Let me get out my highlighter again. General fund, we've got the general fund balance account. It's the account with the 3 that will actually store the balance, and it connects the accounts together. This fund over here to the left is kind of the hidden component that folks don't really see, but the account is definitely one you see. But then below that, we've got several income accounts that are linked to the general fund, and of course, maybe a dozen or 2 different expense accounts that are linked to the general fund. Okay? So this document just kind of nicely displays and shows how the linking or the relationship of funds to fund balance to income and expenses works. In order for a fund to function and work correctly, folks, you've got to have at least one income account, a way of flowing new money into it, and an expense account to be able to spend money out of that fund. And down here further, it shows an example of going to the tree view on the chart of accounts and seeing the relationship or the relational value or relationship between of the fund and the associated income and expenses. Okay, and then further down, it talks about the flow of money. How when you credit income into the income account, the general fund or the fund goes up. When you expense money out, the expense balance goes up, but the fund balance goes down. And then it moves on and talks about our balance sheet, talks about how our assets, accounts we own, equals liabilities, money we owe, plus our equity or fund balance accounts. Okay? And then it provides some example of how an asset account, which basically is an account we own, may store the balance of one or multiple funds. Okay? And this is just a good breakdown of that. So again, if you're unfamiliar with fund accounting, we strongly recommend that you look at this fund theory document. It's been out there for many, many years. but honestly, it offers a good deal of insight in terms of how fund accounting and fund theory works, okay? Also, out on our chart of our website under the Resource Center page, I'm going to also search because I want folks to see that there is a sample, by entering the keyword sample here, accounting sample chart of accounts here to the left. So when we look at this and we click on this PDF document and open that, it now also reveals a sample chart of accounts that that basically just shows what a well-rounded average probably chart of accounts might look like. Okay, assets, checking accounts, savings, money markets, CDs, investments, accounts receivable clients, fixed assets. And then it goes down into liabilities and shows, in this case, payroll tax liabilities, accounts payable vendors. I even think we've got our pass-through liabilities in here as well, and then some other loan and mortgage liabilities too. Then we get down into our fund balance accounts down here, and again, it shows just a average number of funds that we may have in our chart of accounts. Okay, each one of these is their own reporting entity, regardless which bank account the money sits in. And then ultimately, when we move past those funds, we notice we're going into our income accounts and then ultimately into our expense accounts. Okay, so what I tell folks is, while no chart of accounts is exactly the same, your chart of accounts will resemble this one in some way. Okay, whether it's through a fund or asset accounts, something, your chart of accounts is going to look like this one in one way, shape, or form. Okay. So again, let me take a quick look at my document here that I've got written up on here. Yeah, again, we just want to make sure that we're starting to introduce the concept, folks, here that assets and funds are different. Okay. Asset accounts are simply bank accounts or accounts where our money is stored. Okay. Fund balances are not those. They're accounts which track money separately, but the fund balances down here under our sample chart of accounts are the accounts that track our money separately. Like I said, regardless of which bank account the money sits in. For all intents and purposes, folks, the only thing that an asset and a fund balance ever share in common, and I'm going to say this again, the only thing that an asset and a fund ever share in common is a balance. That's it. Nothing more. There is no direct link between assets and funds. Okay? You can have a one-to-one ratio of assets to funds, meaning I've got a general checking account that happens to store the balance of or represent the activity in my general operating fund. And then I have a savings account that may represent the balance in my building fund. And conversely, I may have, other assets that represent other funds specifically, as long as you understand that it's not required by church windows that it be that way. Okay. If we really want to back up to basics, folks, before fund accounting programs like Church Windows Accounting were created and have become more widely accepted, when a church wanted to open up or set up a new fund, they would literally go down to the bank and open up a separate bank account. And I've seen charts of accounts, folks, where they've got 12 different assets that represent 12 different funds. And you just have to understand that that's coming from a period of time when they didn't have a fund accounting software program like Church Windows Accounting. All right. I cannot imagine having to reconcile 12 different bank accounts every single month or however many. Okay. You do not need to have a bunch of assets when using Church Windows Accounting. All the money can be stored in one or two different bank accounts, asset accounts that we own, and the fund balance accounts at the bottom of our balance sheet are what track those monies separately. Okay? I would always recommend when I'm talking to folks and I look at charts of accounts that are very complex and they've got a lot of asset accounts, I say, honestly, consider paring these accounts down into fewer assets just to keep the things more manageable. In fact, folks, the fewer asset accounts you have, the less cumbersome it is because you're not having to keep a track of, oh, this asset and this fund balance, assuming I have no outstanding liabilities, always have the same should always have the same balance. Okay? One asset means all the money goes in and out of that bank account, and then as long as the money is correct and the income and expenses are linked to the proper funds and I'm posting to those proper accounts, the asset tracking is really simple and easy. Okay? So anyway, to wrap up the topic about the sample chart of accounts, folks, if there's something on that sample chart of accounts that you like and you want to use it, use it. We don't have a monopoly on that chart of accounts. Take something from it, use it. Whether it's the account number structure or the account name or something like that, by all means, use that. Okay? Finally, before we go into the wizard here real quick, I'm going to set up a few accounts and get through the chart of accounts wizard as quickly as possible. Start on paper. Either print a report from your previous accounting system or chart of accounts, QuickBooks or what have you. Sit that down, write out the chart of accounts, or if you don't have one, write it down, because it'll make this process of entering the chart of accounts easier and simple. Easier, faster. Okay? All right, so I've gone on enough about that. If you have questions after reviewing the sample chart of accounts and the fund theory document, and you have questions about it, reach out to us. We're happy to talk about it with you. All right, so assuming I've got that chart of accounts now down on paper, I'm now going to come in and we're going to start our chart of accounts wizard. First thing it says is, please enter the month and year that starts your accounting year. So here we are, we're on a calendar year starting January through December 25. If you're on a fiscal year, you're going to set that starting month with whatever month starts your fiscal year. So if your fiscal year starts in July, make it July 2025 or July of 2024 if you're wanting to go back and enter transactions. But it says this will create the accounting year for 1/1/2025 ending December 31st of 25. Perfect. It's exactly what we want. So we're going to click this Set Accounting Year button at the very bottom, right down here, okay? All of these have a button at the bottom that allows us to process onto the next page. So now when I click on that, it says, hey, this is going to create the accounting year that I just stated, and is it correct? If it's not, I'm going to say no and go back and fix it, but it is right. We're going to click yes. So it now says, will you be using account numbers for your chart of accounts? Our recommendation, folks, is absolutely yes to this question, okay? I work with people or churches that don't use account numbers, and honestly, folks, it's really, really difficult if account names are not identified correctly to know what type of an account we're working with. When I'm working with account numbers in chart of accounts, if I look at that account number, I know exactly the type of an account that we're working with. So we're going to click yes on that, okay? So it says, how many digits in placeholders do I want in my account numbers? I think, folks, you can have up to, I believe, 12 digits with 11 placeholders if you wish. Now, we're not going to use that many. That's a lot of accounts. But if I want to change it, say right here, okay, a pound sign representing a number in each one of the numbers and the dots representing the placeholders. Once I set this, all of my account numbers will have the same number of digits in them. I cannot deviate from that. But notice this example changes if I change this. So if I backspace to take out one of those middle pound signs, notice what my sample shows. So even if I were to go through with this particular account number structure, 1 digit, dot, 2 digits, dot, 3 digits, I like to just kind of paint this picture numerically, just tell you exactly how many possible account numbers you can have. I can have up to 99,999 possible account numbers in every account number type that I'm using: assets, liabilities, funds, income, and expenses. I think that's more than enough, okay? If you want, you can add more. If you want less, you can take it away. But typically, we would recommend nothing less than 6 like this, particularly since the leading digit on the account numbers is always the type of an account it is. So that's why I was saying 99,999 is because, the first digit is always the account type. So we're going to use this account structure. Click the button at the bottom. It now pops up and says, setting up main funds. So again, folks, this is the very first account type that the software is asking us to set up. So it stresses how important it is that you learn to understand what fund and fund account funds do for you, because that is what our software does. So in this case, virtually all of you have a general fund. So we're going to call this general operating fund. I tab down, it adds the word balance. Perfect. I tab down and it enters. Now it's going to set up an account that starts with the number 3. The leading digit's already in there. So I just have to now do one. I'm going to set mine as 10.100. Folks, and here's one thing we're going to discuss here for a minute is, will this fund have sub-funds right here? Okay. Folks, this is something that a lot of our users set up not realizing what it does or doesn't do for them. And so I'm going to talk about this for a little bit because honestly, this is probably not something you're going to use very often. You can have sub-funds in church windows and you can have sub-accounts in income and say expenses in any account type. But there are times when that's appropriate and when there's not, okay? For something like my general operating fund, there is no way I'm setting up sub-funds for that. I'm going to have income and expense accounts for it, but I'm not going to have sub-funds underneath that, okay? There are restrictions to that, very severe restrictions in terms of what you can do on reports when dealing with sub-funds and sub-accounts, okay? So not going to check that box, all right? I mean, and I'm not going to do that for any other funds. We're going to see you look on the sample, you'll see sub-funds under like memorials, but that might be the only time that I would have funds with sub-funds, a fund with sub-funds, okay? So I'm not going to click sub-funds on that. There's a video out on the website about sub-funds versus subtotals. Subtotals offers a completely different level of flexibility when reporting in church windows. That's what we're going to recommend. So I typically advise no user should set up sub-funds or sub-funds during this process. We're going to click Add this fund. It says, will there be income accounts for the general fund? And of course there are. So I'm going to click Yes. Now grays out the operating fund at the top. My account name is going to be, say general fund income or, or tithes and offerings. Tab down. I'm going to enter a 400 number that starts with a 4. Again, 410 100. Add accounts. It says, will this account have sub-accounts? I can, but I'm not because I want the greatest reporting flexibility. I'm going to use subtotals rather than sub-accounts. We're going to click Add Account. And we'll call next one loose offering income. Okay, notice I'm adding the word income to these because folks who are unfamiliar with our system may not be aware that a 400 account is an income account. And I'll make this one 4110. I'm leaving some room between my account numbers so I can add them others in future if I wish. Let's make it 105. And then I can click Add Account. And I can continue if, flower income 410 110. And I can always change these numbers at any time. So I would continue adding the income accounts for my general fund this way exactly. And then when I'm done, I'm going to click with finished with adding income accounts for general operating fund. At the bottom, again, let me steer some focus here. We might go a couple minutes long today, folks. Sorry about that. This button right down here. Okay. So when I click on that, it says, will there be expenses for general operating fund? And I click yes. General fund is still selected at the top. So I can go, say electric expense, okay? And then tab down and 5. My account numbers now start with 5. So I can do 5, 10, 100. And again, it's asking, will this expense account have sub-accounts? And my answer simply is no. This is not the time to set up accounts with sub-accounts. They should be used sparingly. So let's call this gas expense. So you're getting the idea here that we're simply adding the accounts that are going to be linked to, in this case, the general operating fund. And so I would, again, and now I would just continue with this, with all of these expense accounts linked to the general fund. I can go in and set up subtotals later that group these reports together. And I would go, maybe payroll expenses, pastor salary expense. So you get the idea. We're just entering the accounts as I have them from my report. So maybe I want to change where this number sequencing is. So maybe instead of 10, 100, 10 in the middle representing general fund. I'm going to make these ones now like 150, okay? And I would just continue this process ad nauseum until I'm done with my general fund expenses. When I'm finished, I will click with Finish Expense Accounts for General Operating Fund. Folks, don't worry. I can always go back in later and add more any accounts to any fund. Click on General Fund. Now it asks, do I want to set up another fund? So if I had other funds I was wanting to set up, and if we notice here down here in the bottom right, let me get out my highlighter, it talks about examples of funds right down here. Okay? So just be aware. And if, again, you just go through and do a basic one, you can always go back in and add more later. So we're going to say no. So now it's asking us what asset account number do we want for our accounts receivable. So again, we're going to maybe make this one, how about 10,500? Set account number. So it's a ledger account under which I would add other accounts receivable clients. For the purposes of our webinar today and expediency and trying to wrap things up, I'm going to click the button at the very bottom here now, folks, that says continue without adding accounts receivable client accounts. I can still go back in and add them later. Not worth losing sleep over this right now. So we're going to click on that. Now it's adding up, what is my first asset account? So I'll call this one, you know, Huntington Bank checking. So I'm adding a checking account now. And I tab down, and it's an account that starts with a 1. So it's now 10,100. Again, I'm not adding sub-assets for this add account. And then I would say fifth, third, savings. And tab down, and again, 1, 10, 200 maybe. Okay, add account. And I would continue adding asset accounts, the accounts the church owns, this way until I'm finished with adding asset accounts. Now it's asking me to set up an accounts payable ledger account, so maybe 2, 10, 100 on that, and set account number. So I'm not, again, we're running short here on time, so I want to get through this. I've got to, like I said, folks, I'm sorry I'm going to go a couple minutes long here. I can add accounts payable vendors here if I wish, or I can go continue without adding accounts payable vendor accounts and add those later, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do that, and it's now asking me what I like to set up other liability accounts. So if I click yes, I can now say, okay, say 941 taxes payable account. Now it's doing 100, say 220, 100. Okay, add account. State taxes payable. Just examples of other liabilities. To, what did I make that one? 2110. And add account. So when I'm done with my liabilities, I simply click Finish with Liability Accounts, okay, and I can enter accounts payable payee information over here. I'm finished. It now says I can now go to the Add Will, enter accounts at will, or go to Set Beginning Balances. Please use the buttons at the top to navigate. So I've set up basic accounts in the chart of accounts. Now I can go up to chart of accounts up here, accounts plus minus, and I can add other accounts in future at will anytime, okay, including other funds, you know, asset accounts, clients, accounts receivable, clients, accounts payable, vendors, okay? Final thing here, folks, on a final minute here before we wrap things up. When you close out and come into accounting or go up to chart of accounts, we now have a function up here called beginning balances, okay? So here now are the beginning balances screen that every time I log into accounting now, it's going to pop up and ask me to enter those or finalize those beginning balances. I can enter those balances, essentially my beginning balances for 2025, whatever my reconciled balances were. These are my balance sheet accounts, essentially, assets, liabilities, and funds, okay? They have to be balanced. At some point here later in 2025, I will finalize those, okay? Doesn't have to be today, tomorrow, next week. It just has to be before I want to open 2026. So sometime maybe after I've reconciled church windows with my bank statements for my assets for the first couple of months successfully, maybe sometime after that, but before I open 2026, I want to set those beginning balances and finalize those, okay? But just be prepared. You're going to get this every time. Once you've entered them and saved them, you can just X out of the finalized beginning balances and just work in accounting just like you would normally, okay?